Greetings and peace, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today, this evening. Tonight, I have the honor and privilege of being joined by my Sheikh, Murshid, friend, and brother, Sheikh Wahid Azal of the Fatimiyya Sufi order, who returns for part 17 in the series of dialogues and conversations that we've been having. And in part 17, Sheikh Wahid will educate us on this mentality that we find in the Indian subcontinent region, whether it's India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, a lot of the Muslims that we find there that mix the Hindu traditions and values that we find pre-Islam in those lands, the tribal customs and the caste system and the mentalities, and how that basically they envelop it into their own version of Islam. So without further ado, I would like to say Nur alaikum, welcome and Bismillah to our dear Sheikh and Murshid. Thank you.
Bismillah and Nur, in the name of the light, name of God, the light, and Nur alaikum to everybody. This situation has been encountering, and I have been encountering for a number of years now. I never went after it myself. It actually seems to come to me, and in the domain of cyberspace, people of a similar or even a distantly similar ideology always seem to congregate online. And so I got to peek into an element of a subculture of the subcontinent that I think is a real big problem for Islam itself and Ummah itself from many aspects. I mean, we've always covered the Salafists and the Wahhabis and etc. But there's also a really, seriously festering cancer within the heart of the world of Tashayyu, the world of Shiism itself. And this is only just one of them. There are many others. Obviously, I've touched on a few of them before, namely the Vilayati system of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is a real problem. Then there is the element of the reactionary anti-IRI Shiite crowd, which is mainly represented by people such as the Shirazi clan and Yasser Habib, who made that movie, really crappy movie that they released last year, the Lady of Heaven, which is supposed to be about Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. But this movie and its script is just unbelievable, and the depictions are so incredibly racist and shameful that it breaks one's heart that a movie bearing the name of the Lady of Heaven, has to traverse issues in such a manner. But we want to talk today about the Shindus. Let me first rewind and go back to my first year in Berlin, when Roya and I befriended a gentleman and his then girlfriend, now wife, living in one of the suburbs of Berlin. This individual was a Shia. He had studied in the Hawza in Iran. He had studied also in the UK. Came from a mixed family. His mother was German and his father was a Pakistani Khoja Shia. And him and I got very close, and we talked about our challenges and whatnot. And he would mention to me the problems that he had with his father's side of the family and the mentality of that side of the family, and how he found the entire worldview, or what the Germans called the Weltanschauung, of these people just incredibly toxic and anti-Islamic, even though these people were everywhere within this subculture of Shiism, whether in Iran or Iraq or even in Pakistan and elsewhere. And I listened to him and whatnot. And one thing that he said, and like I said, he came from that subculture from his father's side. He said to me, and I don't mean any offense by saying this, but he said to me that he looked on the Khoja subculture of India and Pakistan as being like the Jews of Islam. And I asked him to clarify what that meant. And he said, well, because these people only stick with each other, they marry within each other. It's very rare that they marry outside of their subculture. And the marriage of his father and his mother was a rarity. And that, they're uber wealthy, they're extremely classist and caste conscious, in exactly the same way that you find amongst the Brahmins of India. And so, I listened and nodded my head and, basically then aired my own dirty laundry about the Iranian middle-class subculture and its corruptions and whatnot. And he had lived in Iran, so he understood a lot of this as well, and interacted with the Iranian middle classes in diaspora. So he understood where I was coming from as well. Unfortunately, they left Berlin in early 2014 and went to Spain, and he's got a very lucrative and successful practice doing traditional Islamic medicine, combining it with alternative, homeopathic and holistic medicine in Spain, of all places. But he lives, I think, somewhere near Seville or Cordova, where the old Andalusia was. I haven't seen this gentleman for over 8 years now. And I wish him well. I had one conversation with him after Roya passed away. He called to give me his condolences, but he was the one who really opened my eyes to what this subculture is about. Back in around 2016, when my own problems with a lot of these Dugan followers and the people, that were in some fashion connected to them, kind of, escalated and exploded, with some of these people prominently on Facebook being in the middle of it, basically trying to push me out of a group that I was basically the list owner for. It was called Shia Irfan, and it then later turned out that one particular individual that I think actually lives near you, not in Pennsylvania, but somewhere in New Jersey, was a person responsible for basically tearing that entire list down. And I just didn't understand where this sort of duplicity was coming from. This particular individual was openly bragging on their Facebook wall how they had been approached by the FBI at one point and for recruitment, to work with them as a internal informant for the FBI amongst the Shia and Muslim community in the East Coast of the United States. And I just looked at this all as just bizarre. Where is this sort of mentality coming from? If you're a Muslim Shia living in the United States, you're practically within enemy territory. Why then be recruited to spy and inform on other members of your community, Muslim, Shia, or otherwise, who are being persecuted by this system? But then I found this pattern very pervasive amongst the Khojas, in the UK. I began to see it, where a lot of these people were working for the Quillam Foundation, which is this neoliberal foundation founded by Tony Blair that is a crossover, that crosses over with a lot of the agendas of neoconservatives across the Atlantic. I found some of these people and their families, one side of their family working for outfits like Press TV in Iran that's connected to the regime in Iran, while simultaneously other members of their family were either with the Quillam Foundation, the BBC in London, or similar things. So, and these were family members, extended family members. And I just, I looked at this form of opportunism as just unbelievable, but, as my friend had told me and had basically informed me at that point, this is a very central feature of the subcultural toxicity that animates many of these people. And so only about last year, there was a gentleman, he lives in Tanzania, and he comes from that subculture, and he started posting on my Facebook wall, saying about how he was being shunned and ostracized and persecuted by his own extended Khoja, families because of his views and because of his work with Black African Muslims and because of his views about against classism and etc. And so we talked a little bit, and he posted a little bit on my wall. Then earlier in this year, a bunch of these guys on one of these social media sites began for no reason at all attacking me. And so several of the people of the Fatimiyya, one of whom lives in Germany, went over to that site and tried to find out what was going on, and things kind of escalated between these people. And eventually that list, I think, even disappeared. But from that point, this whole notion of the Shindu, I began to refine and define what it means, because I think these sorts of identifications are in the long term helpful for the sake of social science itself, to kind of understand a greater social dynamic, at least on the sociological level of things. From the spiritual side of things, well, the issue is obvious. It's corruption. These people are, in my opinion, effectively what the idolaters of old would have been, because they are worshipers of their caste, their position. Islam, at least as far as the relation of Islam is concerned, does not make distinctions between race, class, etc., but these people do. But a little history is in order. I made a post about this, a blog post, which I think might be helpful to read. This was done in October of last year. So, like a dictionary entry, with a picture of Narendra Modi as the picture of the post, I write, Shindu, noun, a caste-conscious Hindu Brahmin in the garb of a Shiite Muslim. The Shindu represents one of the most culturally toxic, classist, racist, and socially corrupt elements in the world of Twelver Shiism today. A significant percentage of contemporary Shindus hail from the assorted Khoja families of Gujarat, Maharashtra, Rajasthan, and the city of Hyderabad, who switched from being Nizari Ismaili Shia to 12er Ithna Ashari Shia during the 19th century. Today, many Shindus can be found all over the world among the 12er Shia diaspora. They usually only marry among themselves and shun and discriminate against all non-Shindu Muslims. Because they enjoy the privilege of wealth and status, especially the Khojas amongst them, Shindus have sometimes been labeled with the stereotype of being, quote unquote, the Jews of the Muslim community. Most of the private funding for assorted Shia shrine complexes in Iraq and Iran, as well as elsewhere, comes from the coffers of Shindus. In India, and against the general trend of other Muslim communities, Shindus support the BJP and the fascist government of Narendra Modi against the best interests of both the majority of Indians as well as Indian Muslims alike. From 2016 to 2021, many Shindus as far afield as Lahore, Pakistan to Manchester, UK supported far-right candidates in Western elections. Online, many Shindus during that time were also openly supporting the activities of the far-right networks of Alexander Dugin, and many of them could be seen rubbing shoulders in social media pages of assorted white and Aryan supremacist figures. Shindus are also well known for being informants and collaborators with Western intelligence and law enforcement agencies against other Shia and Muslim communities and individuals. Shinduism can be classified as both a social and mental disease suffered by a specific subculture from the subcontinent. Currently, no cure for this social and mental malady has been found. Besides the Islamic Republic of Iran and its abject failures, most problems in the Shiite Muslim communities today can in one way or another be tracked back to Shinduism and its subculture. One of the many casualties of Shinduism was the late scholar Seth Carney, who fell in love with a Shindu girl but was denied her hand, and soon thereafter he committed suicide. See also neo-Akhbarism, Malangs, and Tafkikism. So this is my self-generated entry, as it were, in this ongoing social virtual encyclopedia of the internet. You can, I'll give you the link to this, and you can put it under the description box, and people can go check this out for themselves. But this is what we're dealing with. And over the years, a lot of people who have converted to Islam and gone into Shia communities, especially in North America and Europe, have then, after a certain period of time, especially if they have to come from like working class or white collar backgrounds, have then basically run the other way from these people. And Shia communities completely, because of the kind of hypocrisy and double standards that they have witnessed in these communities in North America. And it's very unfortunate, because the Islam of the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam is supposed to be a much deeper, much more equitable, and much more welcoming and inclusive kind of Islam than the Islam that traditionally is associated with Salafis and Wahhabis and the like. But this is what the Shindus have turned it into. And unfortunately, despite all the talk and platitudes that these people utter online, the truth of the matter is that in the real world, they are, as worse, if not worse, than any other parasite that is presently inhabiting the planet and is responsible for the problems that we have. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Sheikh. And that is absolutely true. And all those that are listening, this is a subject that many people do not pay too much attention to. Myself, coming from the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, most people do not know those, a lot of the Shias over there, especially in Islamabad and Karachi and Hyderabad and like those regions, they also tend to come from that same mentality where they tend to stick with their own, deal with their own. And that follows in with the Pakistani Ismailis as well, which I saw a lot in Texas, who are very rich, uber wealthy, and they tend to deal with their own, stick with their own, marry within their own, and they don't want to deal with anybody else. So most people do not know that after Pakistan's independence in 1947, Iran was the first to recognize them as an independent country. But even before that, if that original territory used to be a part of the Persian Empire,
Yeah.
and a lot of those traditions and customs and cultures, you will find everything kind of crisscrosses.
Mhm.
So what we're seeing, even in what I see in the Sunni community and the Shia community alike, when I visited last time Pakistan, is that the Sheikh families, they want to stick with their own, the Khans want to stick with their own, the Shahs want to deal with their own. They marry within their own, like cousin marriages and stuff, which thankfully now, from what I've seen and what I heard, that tradition is slowly changing as the modern generation is becoming more educated in many aspects and matters. And you'll
Mhm.
have certain families where it doesn't matter if you're educated, you have a college degree. The Sheikhs, for example, they don't consider you successful unless you have your own home, unless you have your own business, your own car. So for them, you are not considered a successful human being unless you have those three boxes checked off. And that same mentality follows in the Pakistan Shia community as well, where there was a family that I knew here that lived from the Philadelphia area, a Shah family from the Islamabad region, and they were the same. They didn't want to deal with anybody that was not within their own community, in terms of friends, marriages, ceremonial events, things like that. So that is a mentality that we see with the Hindu caste system
Mhm.
that's embedded into that Pakistani mindset,
Yeah.
right? Because if you go back 600 years ago, a lot of those people, they're all descendants of Hindus,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they will tell you, oh, well, we originally were the Kapoor family or this family, and then we converted, and then we became the Sheikhs, or we took this name, we took that name. So a lot of them come from that mentality and that caste
Mhm.
system, where even in India you have that caste system where one class just wants to deal with their own and engage with their own and to hell with everybody else.
Yeah.
So in Pakistan, that's the same exact thing, where they want to do business within their own, deal with their own, marriages within their own, the whole conduct of life, the whole journey
Mhm.
of life. They don't want to expand beyond that. And it's Sunnis and Shias are
Yeah.
both in Pakistan guilty of that. And I've seen it firsthand. I come from that culture. I've seen it in Lahore, in Islamabad, in Karachi, in different regions and towns. And that's exactly what it is. Even their wedding ceremonies and the way they
Mhm.
do everything, a lot of those traditions and ceremonies are not compatible with what Islam tells you to do. So, and they have their own issues going on there within what I've seen in Pakistan, when especially when I was in Islamabad, where you have like Deobandis and
Mhm.
Takfiris and Ali Hadiths, and everyone is doing their prayers and their call to prayers and their congregations within like 5 minute difference of each other. One person said, "Oh, we do it this way." This other person does it this way. So even within the Sunni community, there's so much caste-based
Mhm.
differences and ignorance that I've seen. These people have a lot of catching up to do with what
Yeah.
Islam and the Ahlul Bayt and all of the true teachings of Islam are telling us to follow. And these people, even when they come to different countries, Islam tells you whatever country you live in, you have to adapt to their rules and customs. And they know they want to stick with their own, deal with their own, and anybody else that comes, it's very hard. Just like how your friend described that dealing with the father side of the family was a nightmare.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you just described is to the T my personal experience of growing in a Baha'i, Iranian Baha'i subculture. It is identical. It's just like that. And this is, until I began to study the social science and particularly Marxism, I didn't really have an understanding of why this was the case. And so people who don't understand these social forces and dynamics then tend to internalize whatever is being projected at them by these people that they're not good enough, which then, creates a dynamic of its own and is responsible for all kinds of depressions and mental illnesses and what have you over a lifetime. So to understand these social forces and what's going on, why people's attitudes are the way they are, and why they project certain things at you, you are basically at their mercy. But once you're equipped with knowledge, and this is why knowledge is power, then in essence, you have power over them. They don't contain you, you contain them in the mind. What you just described before, as you were talking, this went through my mind. It's part of a debate that I have been having, especially with a lot of these far rightists for a long time, who tend to make this very bogus dichotomy between the Semitic and the Aryan worlds, where the Aryan world is kind of predicated as being the superior world, and the Semitic world is to be the inferior. But as we're seeing, and I'm not saying that the Semites are oblivious to this, they're not, they haven't been, but as a kind of a typology, the problem with the Aryan worldview, the Aryan Weltanschauung, beyond the fancy metaphysics and the high platitudes and all of that, beyond that is that it is a paradigm of caste and rigid hierarchization and judgmentalness beyond that, towards everyone and everything that is other than it. And this kind of worldview that then is adopted in the 20th century by the fascist movements, right? We have seen what the extreme of those kinds of views lead to. This is why Aryanism, in my opinion, whatever it shows up is a form of shirk and kufr in every conceivable way. I am not absolving Semites, whether historically or contemporaneously, of being oblivious to these kind of social forces that then creates rigid castes and classes and hierarchies. We know that for a fact that in the society of Mecca during the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, is precisely what was going on. And it took a member from that higher caste of the Quraysh to come out of it and become its worst enemy for that society to transform beyond what it was. So it wasn't just merely about idolatry and idol worship, it was also a class and caste struggle, right? And it was a member of the upper class that then was responsible for taking the entire thing down. So these are the things that people need to take on board. And this is why, even when some of my heroes, such as Henry Corbin, tried to create this dichotomy between Semite religion and Aryan religion, I tend to get my flags go up, because on the one hand, it may be superficially true, but once you go deeper into the dynamic of what this is, it is a real problem, because the Aryan worldview is completely predicated by these religious castes and hierarchies and etc. within the human world. Whereas if you look at it from the point of view of heaven, right, creation is created equal, right? Its value only occurs in a sort of, utility of whether it is closer or further away from truth. Now, because someone is born into a certain caste or class, is no guarantee that during the course of a lifetime, this individual will gain access to closer to the truth. It is the case that at least in the narratives of the Aryan religions or even the Semitic religions, that people who have tended to come out of aristocracies or ruling dynasties have somehow managed to find themselves becoming the prophets and messengers. Whether we're talking about the Buddha, Moses, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or other examples. Even Zarathustra, who came out of the priestly class. But this in itself is not a rule. It's always an exception, not a rule. Why? Because a lifetime of privilege, right, as any form of conditioning shows, will make that person into the conditioning that they have received. It takes only an extremely exceptional individual who is truly switched on during a lifetime to realize that conditioning in itself is the problem and then breaks away from it. Hence the Buddhas, hence the Moseses, hence the Zarathustra's, et cetera, and these people are unique. Otherwise, the fallacy in the argument that is being posited is that then every member of a ruling dynasty or aristocracy, by definition, should then emerge as an enlightened Buddha or a prophet messenger, etc., which we know is absurd, which is because it has never happened. It's always been unique individuals that have come out of these castes and classes who then have managed to then pull down those things. In the case of Moses, rescuing his people from Pharaoh, In the case of Buddha, walking away from the ruling dynasty and founding his own creed. In the case of Zarathustra, defying the priestly caste and establishing the Mazda Yasna, the good religion of Ahura Mazda. These examples can be multiplied. So this is my retort to those people who have always made this false bifurcation, false dichotomy between Aryanism and Semitism, right? It is completely false. Whereas if you look beyond even this Aryan Semitic dynamic and go, into the indigenous religions, say in the Americas, here in Australia, or other parts of the world, yes, there are, these societies are built sometimes on a sort of caste, or whether rigid or fluid or whatever. But by and large, there's a difference between these indigenous peoples and the worlds of the Aryan and the Semite, and that is that these people are basically connected to the earth, and there is a meritocracy involved in how they do things. That is the difference. Whereas within these systems that we have found historically in the Aryan world, or even in the Semitic world, birth has had ensured privilege, not merit. Whereas with indigenous peoples, it is merit, not birth. You understand? This is not a rule, but from my readings and observations and my thinking about these issues and researching and reading more about these indigenous civilizations, this is the conclusion that I've reached. And that is why those tribal societies, in my humble opinion, in a sense, have been closer to the creator of things because of that, because they have been more equitable in the way that they have elevated individuals in their society as opposed to, others. But here's the problem that we find ourselves in, is that as, within the greater Muslim community, these people are basically setting agendas, controlling agendas, are responsible both for shepherding people in, and unfortunately, due to their behavior and the way that they live their lives, shepherding people out. So, despite the injunction in the command of creating the Dar al-Islam, the realm of peace, these people are in essence responsible for expanding the Dar al-Harb, whatever they pretend to. And I give you an example, just a small example. I won't name names. There was a gentleman not too long ago who came to me. He's got some sort of problems in his marriage. At the end of the conversation, he confessed to me that he didn't believe in God. He said, really, I don't believe in Allah. Yet sometime later, only recently, after I publicized my translation of the 15th unity of the Bayan, this individual had a complete cow, and now has severed his relationship with me and considers all these things, to be haram and kufr, etc. So, this kind of cognitive dissonance, where on the one hand, you say you don't believe in God, you don't believe in a first principle, there's no Allah. That was his own words. But yet, when it comes to the question of the Sharia, or elements of the Sharia that are being reformed, this individual gets on their high horse and becomes, your most lockjawed mullah. So this is the question: is it not the case in this example that a segment of the Ummah, and particularly the Shias amongst them, have turned elements of the Sharia into the same kind of idols and taghut that the people of Mecca have made? What is immutable in this existence? Is it the law that has been revealed, that is contingent in a particular period in history, or is it the essence of God itself? And this question is self-evident and axiomatic. It is the All-High, it is God, the Tawheed, the unity, the Wahid Azal, that is immutable to all things, is beyond all things, it is the first principle of all things, it is the first and the last of all things, and everything in between. Not the law, not the Sharia. Now, within the history of Sunni theology, this became an extremely thorny issue during the Abbasid period, where one segment of these Sunni theologians were constantly arguing that the Quran is co-equal and equal with Allah, whereas a lot of the Shiites, and especially the rationalists among the Shiite theologians from the Mu'tazila school, held these kind of notions to be complete nonsense, because the word that comes is proceeding, so it is a production of the All-High and is not coeval with it. It is a created thing. And these debates, sometimes between these two communities seem to go backwards, where now, you have a lot of Sunnis, especially those who have been educated, in social science and whatnot, are tending to lean now more to the rationalist Mutazili position or the position of the Islamic philosophers, whatnot, whereas you have a lot of these Shindu types, basically latching on to these arguments of the old fundamentalist Sunni theologians of the Abbasid period. I find this an extremely interesting dynamic. But here we are, where God and the existence of God is kind of negotiable, but the Sharia is not. This is just insane. The whole be all and end all of the Din al-Haq, the religion of truth, is God as the first, the last, the manifest, the hidden. Everything else is a detail. Everything else is a detail beyond that. That is the principle of all things. And if you do not cling to that, and then you cling to the details, you have literally missed the forest for the trees.
That's absolutely right, Sheikh. And that is absolutely the truth, that the only reality is the Almost High that has no beginning and has no end. And that is al-Haq. And what I've seen in Pakistan also is just like how they do in other Muslim countries, how they put Sunni and Shia like against each other. They want them to fight with each other instead of coming in unison of being the true ummah and of Islam and all the things that we're supposed to do when we come together. But there have been factors where, let's say you had intelligence agencies of the West that have sent, let's say they groomed a lot of these guys in England or other places, and they send them to Pakistan to be leaders or imams or things like that. And then they're there to create rifts, not only within Sunni and Shia, but if he's dealing exclusively with Sunnis, within Sunnis as well, putting one group against the other. And then there will be aspects of those from the Shia that will be doing the same. So there's a lot of hands involved for the Muslim people not coming together.
Yes, of course
there are a lot of
and,
influences involved.
Yeah, and a lot of them are internal. But see, let us look at both the symptom and the cause of this. That individuals that belong to a community allow themselves to walk down that path and become the native informants, as Frantz Fanon defines it, takes a certain view of the world. And that certain view of the world is nothing else than the transactional mentality. When you are basically brainwashed to look at everything outside of yourself as a commodity with material value, then even your religion and your identity is occupying that space, yes. let alone that of others, right? So then it is natural for these people who are weak and who don't really have a true internal connection to the All High to be recruited, because their Islam is just nothing but an outward identity. It's just one identity amongst others. Whereas what they really are seeking within themselves is really advantage, personal and material, occupational, whatever. And this is a problem, not only for those individuals themselves, because once this is expanded into the collective level, this is the problem that we're finding ourselves in the world. Despoiling, destroying the environment for profit, to the point that the ecology of this planet is beginning to tear apart. And eventually, within the next 100 years, if we go on this train, and if this gravy train is not stopped, we will all die, because the ecological system will begin to collapse and cannot then sustain any life. There's a balance. The All High, the creator of all things, has set a very fine balance. And it was our responsibility as the Ahsan al-Makhluq, the greatest creation, to be the custodians, trustees, and caretaker of this balance, not to be its destroyers.
Thank you, Sheikh. And it's interesting because the aspect of, there's another thing that I've seen in this subcontinent culture when I was in Pakistan, is that a lot of these guys, especially what I've seen within the Shaykh tribe as well, they like to have pissing contests with each other. That, hey, I have this many businesses, I have this much money, I know this many people, I got this many connections. It's not about us becoming closer and getting close to God. It's about, oh, I'm more bigger and badder than you. I have a business and a house in Islamabad in the rich area. So that's what the mentality these people are stuck on, is this egoism. And even when I went to Karachi, I had a hard time breathing, because these people are so greedy. A lot of these developers, they're making buildings left and right in places which buildings shouldn't be made. And
Mm.
I was thinking one day when I was in Karachi that I can't even breathe. Everywhere I look, I'm
Yeah,
surrounded by high-rise buildings,
construction. Yeah, and
and
constructions.
they're just for greed. They're just doing so much, and I'm thinking that when the founders of this country, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, when they had a vision to make this country for the Muslim people who wanted to be separate from India at that time during the British Raj, they didn't envision what we're seeing here. They wanted to make a secular state that
Yes,
where all
that's
people
right.
were respected, like Allama Iqbal and Muhammad Ali
Yes.
Jinnah. And there
Yep.
was also an Ismaili who was responsible for the
Mhm.
creation of Pakistan, Aga Khan
Yep.
III,
Yes.
who was, and all of them collectively, they had a vision that we want to make this a secular state, which is on the principles of Islam. And if you look at the old pictures of Pakistan, you will see people like that were dressed very nicely,
Mm.
sophisticated. General Ayub Khan was received by the
Yes.
president of America. So there came a time when suddenly these military dictators came in and
Mm.
who often had like a Western influence behind them.
Yeah, or on the
And
payroll of the CIA,
that
mostly. Yeah.
that that's
Yeah.
it. And that's when the destruction of Pakistan started. And ever since then, we see the condition that it is right now, where the military and the intelligence are living like kings over there. And you have the elite classes, both Sunni and Shia, that are living in Islamabad, Lahore, Karachi, while the rest of the population suffers.
Mhm.
And it's just unfortunate. But if I look at the original foundation of that country, what Aga Khan III, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Allama Iqbal, the poet, the vision that they had, it's totally been infiltrated. It's been taken out. And even if you look at Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, when he ripped up the demands of the West in the UN, and he told them that I'm not going to be subservient to you, that's when the West came in and they used General Ziaul Haq. They got him
Mm.
assassinated, and boom, they got him involved in the Afghan war and so on and so forth. But that's the thing. In that region, you're always going to have these external elements that will also use the internal elements to turn you one against the other. So if I go to Islamabad right now or Rawalpindi and I tell them, what if Sunni and Shia come together? And they're going to tell me, Salman, don't say that. Shia are kafir, or things like that. And I tell them, read the Quran. What does it say? Or read the
Mm.
teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. Read the teachings of this. Read the teachings of that. Educate yourselves. And I'm happy to say that the new generation of Pakistanis that I'm seeing, what we call Generation Z in America, like the latest ones that are turning 18, 19, 20 years old, they're much more open-minded. They're educated. They're breaking this cousin marriage trend. They're
Mm.
breaking out of those tribal customs. So I believe, if I'm taking a more positive mindset, Sheikh, that within my lifetime, I could see that country going in a positive direction. And
Inshallah. Inshallah.
right now, Iran, our neighboring country, because Pakistan shares a border with Iran, and we're all connected from ancient history to present moment. And hopefully, same things happen for the people of Iran, where
I hope s-
the
we pray.
leadership, they have
We pray.
leadership and youth that are there to benefit the country. And
Yes, they are.
let's just see as time goes on what happens. And I think the only thing that will eliminate this ignorance is education. Is tell them this is what your Islam is teaching you, not what your culture is teaching you or what your tribe and customs are teaching you, but what al-Islam is teaching you. Are you following the deen, or are you following your culture and tribe and your caste system?
Education is important, but that the niyyah or the intention behind education on the one end, and then the sidq, the honesty of the individual and their thirst to know the truth is another part of the dynamic, because a lot of people in the West can be educated, fill their heads with a lot of information, get PhD, even become faculty members with tenure at universities and not be 1 inch close to the truth.
Yeah.
So, these components are also important. We're seeing this everywhere. I see this in a lot of different diaspora communities, where this whole thing of drive, of succeeding, of competing, and buying into the entire neoliberal capitalist bourgeois paradigm and way of being in the world has been subsumed. A lot of these kids have gone into Ivy League schools, Harvard, Yale, etc., they have come out, but as people and as assayers of ilm in the true sense of the word, knowledge, they have nothing. They're part of the system. So, you know, Allah subhanahu is calling humanity and especially subcultures and the youth to a much, 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 much higher standard than that for the transformation of the world, because there are other elements involved. The truth is simple. This saying by Ali alayhi salam, al-ilm nuqtatil wahida katharaha al-jahilun, knowledge is a single point which the ignorant have multiplied, is a very, very multifaceted and deep thing. I have thought and contemplated the saying of Mawla Ali alayhi salam for many, many years, and it has shown up itself and its dynamic and what it is speaking to many, many times in things that I've observed. And I've even applied a lot of these sayings, and that particular saying, in sociological and social scientific analysis, and even in my counseling and therapy sessions with certain people. So it is really about that, you know, the accumulation of knowledge, material knowledge for its own sake, as a means of material success, itself becomes a form of shirk. But the accumulation of knowledge, both for the inner transformation of the individual, right, to seek the truth, and then once the truth is found, to then bring this truth, you know, to serve other creatures. That is what the path is about. So in essence, education should be about what Mullah Sadra in his Asfar Arba, the four journeys, talks about, the four journeys of the soul, you know, from humanity to God, from God to God, from God in God, and from God back to humanity. These are the four journeys of the soul. So if education or any other endeavor in life is taken from this perspective and applied in a real world setting, the fruits of it, both for the individual and what is around them, will be immense at all time. All of the things that you have said, and we have talked about this Shindu culture, like I said, I have experienced this during my own lifetime. I experienced it within the larger Iranian Baha'i upper middle class subculture. Most of my extended Baha'i family are exactly like what we've described, where they preach platitudes and, you know, high-sounding words with one side of their mouth, but they're all about the cash, and they're all about the judgment of other people with or without the cash. And this is a talgut. This is a but, an idol that people of real conscience have a duty to break, like the early Muslim broke the idols of Mecca. And if I have to be the one to light this flame, so be it. I have no problem with that. And I also have no problem, and I will not, apologize to anybody for what I am writing in the completion of the Bayan, especially in the 15th unity. What a lot of these people find controversial is that I have now abrogated the injunction against the eating of pork, although with a caveat, because in that unity, I very categorically state that even though I have lifted this injunction, nevertheless, the best form of diet is vegetarianism. Why? Because excessive flesh consumption creates health problems over lifetime, and particularly the swine, the pig. Nevertheless, once you get a historical consciousness about why, for example, the swine of flesh was prohibited in Judaism and in Islam, it becomes very obvious is that because the animal husbandry and the technologies of farming that existed 2,000 years ago or 1,400 years ago are very different to the technologies of animal husbandry and farming technology that we have today. The sanitation and hygiene of animals that existed in these farming complexes didn't exist at that time. And the pig particularly is an animal that eats everything, including its own young, right? But now, with industrial-based, pig animal husbandry and what have you, this has changed. Nevertheless, what I'm saying is that, look, I am not going to exclude anyone on the basis of their dietary habits from approaching the truth, right? Nevertheless, you should maybe consider also that the best form of diet is one where you're not consuming flesh at all. You're eating only vegetables. It's better for your health. And also, if you want to be on a spiritual path, vegetarianism long-term is much better in opening your subtle centers and calming yourself down, whatnot. Whereas with excessive flesh consumption, it creates agitation on a biochemical model. So this is the thing I'm saying. Same with alcohol. I have lifted the the prohibition on the drinking of alcohol, but with caveats. And what are these caveats? Do not drink in public. Do not drive a vehicle while you are intoxicated. Never, ever, ever offer a alcoholic beverage to someone under the age of 18. And above all, do not go anywhere near prayer or worship for as long as you possibly can when you're intoxicated, right? These, by the way, for Muslims who know their history of jurisprudence, were exactly the same caveats where the Maliki school of fiqh in Sunnism allowed actually the consumption of wine and alcohol if those particular caveats were followed. Now, the other three schools had a problem with it, and eventually also the Jafari school of 12 Shiism, but the Malikis, if you read their textbooks of jurisprudence, this is exactly what they have allowed. But I think the underlying problem this particular gentleman that came to me that had a cow is that because I am elevating the status of women. I'm not only talking about equality, I'm talking that in order to create a global balance, there needs to be a period where women actually dominate, where women then become the head of the households, because you will not destroy patriarchy right away as a process without first doing the very opposite of patriarchy, right? And by doing the opposite of patriarchy, I don't mean by what the Western feminists think, feminism is or matriarchy is. They've got it all wrong too. They've recreated patriarchy with just a female face to it. What I'm saying is that the female, as all of our texts in Islamic mysticism say, and as the Far Eastern and Hindu spirituality, such as the Tantra, have been asserting for thousands of years, the woman within herself, within her inner, pristine, integral, innate archetype is divine. We have hadith to this effect saying exactly the same thing. Heaven falls at the feet of mothers. These are not just platitudes, they have meaning, and they are multifaceted in the applications of their meanings, right? So by creating a balanced world, the only way that we can get there is to allow, even if for a short period of time, the women to dominate.
Yeah.
But to the mentality of someone who has been raised over life and believing that the male of the species is superior, and who takes some of the verses in the Quran saying that literally rather than symbolically and allegorically, this is the ultimate affront. You're basically, telling these people, everything that they don't want to hear. So they get on their high horses and they go crazy at you. But I mean what I say. I believe that women should dominate. I believe that it is time for a civilization of the mother and the civilization of the woman who is responsible. Also, because then this raises the responsibilities that women have as the head of the household and as the leaders of the world to a much higher level. And it then forces these women to kind of think outside of boxes that the current patriarchal civilization is not even allowing itself to think out of. So these are the issues.
And that's absolutely right, Sheikh. And even if you look at the aspect of what Islam teaches, of Bismillah Rahman Rahim, Rahman and the Rahim, the feminine and masculine, and how your faith is not complete unless both the male and the female come together. So there's so many factors which teach us this oneness of the Creator and how you're supposed to love and respect and elevate the women in your society, whether it's your mothers, your wife, your sister, your daughter. And that's another problem that I've seen in that subculture, is that they basically keep their women locked up. Women can't just go out in the open, and it's such a perverted culture where a woman cannot go out unless she has somebody there looking out for her, because a woman goes out by herself, there will be catcalling. The guys will start following her all the way. Sometimes I heard stories where they follow them all the way home. So
Wow.
a woman doesn't even feel safe in Pakistan because of that perverted mindset, and how both of them are basically deprived, where basically the aspect of a man and woman coming together. It's natural when you get older.
Sure.
You have those feelings. Man has for woman, woman has for man. It's all natural, but they're all restricted because you can't marry anybody besides your cousin. Then the women are not allowed to go outside. When they do go outside, there's catcalling and all this stuff that happens. So that's a repressed society. I even seen that in women over there, where they pretend to be possessed by demons or ghosts or jinns, and the person will always say, oh, maybe you should get him married, that will help them out. And after marriage, the jinns and demons and ghosts suddenly go away because they got the union that they were looking for with their counterpart. So that women cannot express themselves in any other way. She doesn't want to say that I'm a woman and I'm in need of a man. She can only say that, oh, you're not doing anything for me, you're not taking any action from me. Okay, let me go down this jinn and demon route, and then they will hopefully get me married, and that will help me out, because she cannot directly say that, otherwise she'll be looked down upon. A divorced woman is looked down upon, which should not be the case. It's a sunnah to marry a divorced woman or
Yes,
a widow, right? So
yes.
our prophet, peace be upon him, his first wife Khatija was a widow. So these people just don't have no education. They're locked up in their materialistic and perverted minds, and the women are not given their due rights. And that's why I believe Pakistan, with all the floods and all the hell that is going on in that country, that is a punishment from God.
Yes, of course.
Get your acts together, treat each other correct, treat your women correct, treat your children correctly. You will have peace and blessings in your life. And that's another thing where a woman, it can get abused or she could get hurt, and if she goes to the authorities there, she has no right and she has no say, which is all against Islam in all of its totality. And I myself, as somebody from the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, will tell them, look at the basis of what your country was founded on, as a secular society, by Aga Khan III, by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Qaid Azam, who's on your rupees, and you have Allama Iqbal. What did they envision? A society where both men and women are respected. Look at the time, look at the old pictures before the Western military dictators ruined your country. Look at the old pictures of the Pakistani women dressed in business suits, going to college, and all the men who had the nice, sophisticated look in their mannerisms, in their appearance. Go back to your origin, and that's when you will become the Republic of or Islamic Republic of Pakistan as your founders had envisioned. Until then, you will continue to suffer in this hell with this internal interference and external interference.
Yeah,
So you have to
but
get your act together, leave your
it
culture behind, and come follow to Islam.
absolutely, but it's not just localized to Pakistan, because like we've been talking, this is also present amongst a lot of diaspora communities. I expect, especially amongst the wealthier classes amongst them. But the question I have, you may be able to answer this, then, if this is the prevailing norm in Pakistan, how did a Pakistani society deal with the premiership of Benazir Bhutto when she was prime minister for as long as she was, 3 times, I think, right?
Well, that's with Benazir Bhutto. That was because with the assassination of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto,
Yes. Yeah.
when he was a great leader of Pakistan. He helped people, he helped the poor. He was a socialist, and what we
Yes,
would
of course.
describe as a good role model of what we envision in the newer FSO. That
Yeah.
there's an equitable justice system that we want to see, where the poor, the needy, they all get taken care of. And my mother even describes stories in her youth. She has witnessed personally herself Zulfikar Ali Bhutto coming to these places and giving food and medical supplies and help to the people, money to the people. And it's, you see, that's the thing. Any leader that does that for his people, that's when the West gets a hard on for them and they go and
Yeah.
try to take them down. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what happened. The West were demanding certain things from him, and he stood up at the UN and he ripped up their papers right in front of their face.
Good for
And
him.
yeah, that's right. And then after that, they used the chief of army staff, Ziaul Haq,
How? Yeah.
yeah,
Get rid of him.
to get rid of him. And right after that, Ziaul Haq was in Washington D.C. meeting with Kissinger and
Yeah.
Reagan and these
Yeah.
people, and they
I
got
remember all of that.
Pakistan. They got Pakistan involved in the Afghan-Soviet war with the ISI, and they're all working together to defeat the Soviets. So that's exactly what it is, unfortunately. And right after that, Benazir Bhutto rose to power through her father. So it was her father's legacy that helped her prominate herself into that catapult. And to this day, the Pakistan People's Party, which basically her party represents, is living off of the name of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, even though the modern ones are corrupt as hell and they're all groomed in England. And I'm sure Zulfikar Ali Bhutto is not happy with how his descendants have turned out.
It happens, unfortunately. That it's very interesting you talk about that era, because I was a child back then in Iran, and I remember vaguely. I must have been about 5 years old when that coup in Pakistan happened, because the whole dynamic of what happened in Pakistan in the ousting of Bhutto was then the setup that America created to go after, to both take down the Afghani socialist government, which then forced the Soviet Union to invade Afghanistan, which ultimately brought down the Soviet Union itself during the 80s. But had Zulfikar Ali Bhutto remained in Pakistan and succeeded in the policies that he was trying to implement, it would have been great for that entire region. Afghanistan would have remained stable. There would have not probably been a escalating conflict with India. There wouldn't probably have been a nuclearization of both India and Pakistan. And very paradoxically, the Shah of Iran, even though he was with the Western camp at the time, thought the world of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. And there was a constant exchange between Iran, the Pahlavi Iran, and Bhutto at the time. And it was during that era where the Iranian government, from about the mid-60s until the revolution, instituted a policy they called the White Revolution, which in many ways was trying to, under the guise of a constitutional monarchy and being pro-Western, they were trying, at least a segment of the government was attempting to implement a social democratic order in Iran. So they were offering, throughout Iran, they were offering free education throughout all the rural parts of Iran, free food for every child was guaranteed through a parliamentary act and a royal edict. All of this I remember very well. Unfortunately, that all of that went to hell when the Islamic Revolution in Iran happened. And despite all the rhetoric that we heard from these people, and especially the Ayatollah Khomeini, not a single thing that they promised they implemented, not one. Instead, they turned that country into a complete basket case. 8 years of war with Iraq after that, and then basically economic, the economic and beyond the conflict with the West. But within Iran itself, they plundered that country, and environmentally they have devastated it. Iran is some of these great lakes and water basins that used to be responsible for a breadbasket in certain parts of northern Iran on the agricultural level have all dried out. Lake Urumia, which was one of the oldest lakes in Iran, existing for thousands of years, very lush in that area, is completely parched. All because of the stupid policies of these people and the economic, rape that these mullahs, this Islamic Republic of Iran, has instituted. So, despite their rhetoric against the West and their anti-imperial talk, at the end of the day, these people are no different than the Zia al-Haqs and the Saudis and the rest of them, whatever else they say. And this is the problem that we're facing as both an ummah and a species, is that everything is fake. People who claim to represent a cause or something don't necessarily represent what they say. It's all smoke and mirrors. And that is why I understand where a lot of people in the world today are weary of people who come forth and are offering something new, But this is the thing. The Lord of the universe is demanding that this paradigm, all of it, be unraveled for something much better than we already have.
Yes, that's absolutely right, Sheikh. And I think right now we're at a pivotal crossroads. Even me living here in the West, I came to this country when I was 5, and frequently my journey took me back. So I have elements of both Eastern and Western upbringing in my analysis and the way that I see things. And even what I see here, you have inflation, high crime, corruption. You have all the roads are busted. If you try to get something done legally, lawfully, you're going to be stuck in a process for a while unless you know people. If you want a job, unless you know people, you're not going to get it. So America is becoming a third world country as we speak.
It
And
is.
Pax Americana is collapsing right before our eyes, this period between 2020 through 2029. And that's exactly what it is. The American dream is an illusion. It doesn't exist. And if those people that leave third world countries, that's the same exact conditions that I described. They leave and come to these countries here in the West. So right now, that is not the case with America right now. It's just hanging on for dear life, with especially these next 10 to 11 years, this time period that we find ourselves in. And of course, the Almost High does hold everyone accountable for their karma. So that's also an effect also.
100%. And you mentioned the Pax Americana. I mean, it's arguable whether the Pax Americana ever existed for other than the white middle-class male. You know, even for the women, it was never a peace. There were Pax. So, you know, everything is being revealed, you know, that the masks are being lifted by the All High in this day on everybody, you know, not just, you know, one or two communities. So, you know, what this podcast should demonstrate to certain people who are watching it is that Salman and I are quite willing to criticize our own side without, you know, pulling a single punch as we're doing it. We represent a path that is wanting to transform the world, and we will, you know, we will not cut anybody slack, you know, who needs not to be cut slack in this process. But those who need to, those who we cut the slack for, who deserve the slacking of or cutting of the slack, we will give them no problem. Because truth is the highest commodity there is with God.
Yeah.
Nothing else, not monetary wealth, not status, not the color of your skin, nothing but the truth.
That's it, Sheikh. And I believe right now, I believe it's Malcolm X who said this quote, if I'm not mistaken, that standing for truth in time of deceit is a revolutionary act.
Yeah.
So truth.
And we're revolutionaries. We're revolutionaries here.
And that's it. That this is what for those that are watching, this is what the Noor FSO is, and for all of the other critics out there who have their own ideas and own agendas, Noor FSO wants to create an equitable society for all mankind. So if you're in the US, please reach out to me if you would like further information, and reach out to Sheikh Wahid Azal as well. And this is what we're doing. We're trying to, the order, our Sufi order, the more that will come into our fold and realize the dream and vision, the more we're going to be able to help humanity and each other. So I thank you, Sheikh. This has truly been an education for me as well. So thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And likewise. And likewise.
Thank you. So until next time, until Sheikh joins us for part 18, Noor alaikum.
Alaikum.